Thank you for joining today's webinar on Secure Choice 2.0, States Blazing a Path to Retirement Security for All. Today's program is part of NCPERS Center for Online Learning. The purpose for the Center for Online Learning is to provide remote continuing education to public pension trustees, staff, and other fiduciaries and stakeholders. For many Americans, retirement is an unachievable dream. At least half of Americans are ill-prepared financially for what should be their golden years, with the current shortfall in retirement savings that has been estimated to be upwards of $14 trillion. In 2011, NCPERS published the Secure Choice Pension White Paper. It was our effort to inject innovative new thinking and prompt discussions about the benefits of a state-facilitated retirement savings program for the private sector. Last month, we published Secure Choice 2.0 to review the progress we've made and to highlight some of the innovation we've seen in the market. This webinar will review the new report. As always, we encourage questions and comments. However, in order to get through the presentation, we will hold all questions and comments till the end. The prepared portion of this presentation will last approximately 30 minutes. Additionally, today's presentation and other supporting materials are available in the handout section of the dashboard. So the agenda for the next 30 minutes are as follows. We'll begin the conversation with the topic of how did we get here. We'll explain in further detail about the devastating need in the private sector for retirement savings programs. Then from there, we'll switch gears and talk about where the states are. We will feature 3 states, Oregon, California, and Vermont. Each of those states are unique for specific reasons, and we will discuss their innovative programs further as we get to that portion of the presentation. Then we will talk about what's next in terms of 2018 and going forward at the state, federal, and the private market. Then finally, we'll wrap up with some helpful information and highlight some helpful links, as well as having our Q&A section. So the mission of the Secure Choice 2.0 paper, the purpose was to essentially cover what has transpired over the last 6 years since we published Secure Choice White Paper. Back when we did this in 2011, I think there were some who thought it was very audacious to suggest that states actually had a role and could be beneficial in terms of providing retirement security to our citizens. And there was a fair amount of controversy as to whether this, in fact, was something that states, even if they could, should do. And I think over the last 6 years, we've come a long way. I think a lot of the initial concerns about states' involvement in this area has largely dissipated. There are still those who advocate that this should be approached exclusively by the private sector and the marketplace. But I think the vast majority of Americans, particularly those who are the most in need of retirement savings programs, see the wisdom and the value of having states move in this direction. We'll reflect upon essentially those activities that 9 states have taken over the last 6 years. And different than what the original Secure Choice paper was, which in effect was written in a single voice, meaning because we had to introduce and advocate for a new proposal and a way of thinking, we really didn't have a broad voice in terms of the position. And for the Secure Choice 2.0, we want to actually do something completely different and 180 to that, which was to have a very inclusive viewpoint on state-facilitated programs. So what you'll see as we go through this presentation and as you read through the paper is that we were very mindful of making sure that all the voices were had a part in the Secure Choice 2.0 paper. And as we will highlight in the state section, some of the best practices and innovations that are coming out of states. I think the leading states are living up to the adage of states being laboratories of good government. And I think the Secure Choice movement is one clear example of where states are leading. And then finally, not only are we here to celebrate what we've achieved over the last 6 years, but really this is just what we envision to be an ongoing effort, and we would like to inspire and motivate the next round of states and cities and jurisdictions to move in this area for their citizens. So how did we get here? I touched very briefly on the need that exists in the private sector as it relates to retirement insecurity. When we began to write and do the research for the Secure Choice, the original Secure Choice pension white paper, we did a number of focus group and survey research. And one of the surveys that we conducted was surveying over 800 randomly selected working Americans to find out what level of retirement or access to retirement benefits that they had in the workplace. And what we discovered was not surprising to us because we knew that there was a need in the private sector, but what I guess surprised us was the magnitude of the need that existed in the private sector, where 41% of the respondents did not have access to employer-sponsored retirement benefits. That could be a little bit higher because the 2% of respondents said they didn't know exactly what they had. And then you see that another 6% and 26% only had defined contribution plans. And so when we began this endeavor, we thought that there was a crisis, and it wasn't until we started digging further in terms of writing and doing research for the paper that we understood the magnitude that existed. And over the years, what we found out in 2011, and others have been working on this certainly far longer than we have, our numbers were substantiated and in fact bolstered by other research of other organizations. Some of the organizations highlighted are AARP. Their research shows that 55 million working Americans do not have access to workplace retirement programs. So our survey, we said 41% don't have access to retirement savings programs through their employer. ARP actually gives a definitive number to that 41%. And our research and others show that there is a definitive correlation between the size of an employer and whether that employer is likely to provide employer-sponsored plan to its employees. And I guess not surprisingly for those who think about this, is that the smaller the employer in terms of number of employees it has, the less likely that employer is to provide retirement plan to its employees. And as you go up the scale in terms of number of employees, the likelihood of an employer providing a plan to its employees increases dramatically. So what the effort really for NCPERS and others was to try to solve this problem of particularly those who work for small businesses, how to give them access to a small measure of retirement security. And as we did this research, this correlation of small employers lacking employment plans made a lot of sense to us, in that what we discovered was that this was where the failing of the private market in the marketplace could be clearly seen, where the cost of marketing and administering a plan to employers that are large versus employers that are small is almost virtually the same, meaning that there is no dramatic cost savings for the Fidelities of the world to market a plan and administer a plan for, say, an employer with 1,000 employees versus an employer with under 10 employees. That the costs are built in, and so there is an incentive to service the larger employers and the disincentive to service the smaller employers. And this data is backed by conversations we've had over the years with a number of small employers who just tell us that even though they're interested in providing retirement security to their employees, that the costs and the inability to attract a good service provider were barriers to them providing retirement security to themselves and to their employees. And additional data from Georgetown shows that 45% of all working age households, 40 million Americans, do not own retirement assets. So again, partially due to the inability to gain, small employers to gain, attention of plan service providers, as well as just other barriers, means that, as Georgetown found out, that 40 million Americans don't own retirement assets at this point. What does that mean? Ultimately, it means that we have a retirement savings gap or crisis of upwards of $14 trillion. And this data comes from a research that the National Institute on Retirement Security published back in 2013. And their methodology was essentially, of the current workforce, how much have they currently saved versus what is their anticipated need at retirement, and that gap, that delta, is $14 trillion. And so in many respects, you can view the $14 trillion as a savings underfunding in the private sector. So what's happened since in the 6 years since we published the original Secure Choice Pension White Paper to 2017? Well, from our standpoint, a lot has happened, and we're very encouraged by that. When we started this endeavor back in September of 2011, I privately gave us the modest goal of trying to get one state enact legislation within 5 years. I thought that trying to get one state to do something about it, within 5 years, I thought it was reasonable, given the size of the crisis. A lot of people thought that was being overly aggressive, that if we could just have some discussion, some hearings at the state level, that we should count that as a victory. And while I agreed with them objectively, I I've always been a glass half full kind of guy, and I wanted to have as our goal at least one state enacting legislation. In hindsight, given the desperate levels of insecurity in the private sector, I don't think we should have been surprised that within 5 years we have 8 states that enacted legislation, and that currently we have 9 states that have enacted legislation and are in the various stages of implementation to beginning the hard work of doing the feasibility study in their state to see how best they can help the less fortunate in their states. And so we've reached beyond our initial goals of one state within 5 years, and hopefully not only can we just check off a goal, but really that very shortly we will be helping real working Americans, hardworking Americans, save for retirement and achieve that retirement security that everybody's been longing for. As I said, for Secure Choice 2.1, we wanted a very broad perspective, and so we spent a lot of time interviewing as many scholars, practitioners, experts, and certainly state and federal policymakers and implementers at the local level. To further the research, not only did we do sort of field research, but we also commissioned additional supportive work to follow up on the initial set of research that we did in Secure Choice in terms of testing the model and doing stress testing as well. So, setting that table in terms of the need, where are we now, and where are the states? So, as I mentioned, there are 9 states that have enacted legislation on state-facilitated retirement savings programs. One has started enrolling program participants, which is Oregon, one of the states that we will feature. And the other 8 are in various stages of development. And then beyond that, we have 24 states and cities that have introduced legislation over the past 5 to 6 years. They have not yet gotten to enactment, but again, 24 states have, at a minimum, had legislation introduced and have gone through some measure of the legislative process in those states. So let's begin with a conversation about Oregon. Oregon is featured first because they are, in this instance, the first state to begin implementing their program. They call it Oregon Saves. This is a screenshot of the landing page of Oregon Saves. And here are some of the quick facts about Oregon Saves. The enactment of this program was about 2 years ago, June of 2015. The type of program is an account type is it's a Roth IRA program. The investments are in target date mutual funds. The accounts are pooled and established under the plan for investments. The accounts will be professionally managed. The plan must maintain separate records and accounting for each account. The Oregon Saves will not guarantee any rate of return or interest on any contributions. So it is very much a defined contribution, a Roth IRA styled program. There is no specific number as it relates to investment fees, except that there is a general term about making sure that the administrative fees are kept very low. In terms of governance, there is a board of 7 individuals, and there is an Oregon Saves staff. The board is composed of a treasurer that serves as the chair. The governor appoints a representative of employers, a representative with experience in the field of investment, and a representative of association representing employees, and a public member who is retired. A member of the Senate is appointed by the Oregon's President of the Senate. A member of the Oregon House of Representatives is appointed by the Speaker of the Oregon House. So that composes the 7-member board. The board has the administrative discretion to set the minimum, maximum, and default contributions level. Under the under the final rules of Oregon Saves, the default the contribution level is set at 5. There is a minimum of 1% contribution and no maximum set except for those that are imposed by the IRS. In terms of incentives for participation, the board can examine ways to reduce costs through incentives, tax credits, or other means. In terms of coverage, all employers that do not provide a retirement plan to their employee or employees must participate in Oregon Saves. And the current status is that it is up and running with the pilot program phase. As of this morning, we had got an update from Oregon, and they have, in the pilot program, 11 employers that are participating in Oregon Saves, with 121 employees that have been enrolled. The next phase begins October 17th with what they're calling Wave 1, where they will enroll the largest employers with 100 or more employees. Then April 2018, Wave 2 begins, enrolling the next cohort of employers with employees between 50 and 99 employees coming online. Then in November 2018, Wave 3 starts, enrolling the smaller employers with employees between 20 and 49 employees. And then 2019 through 20, they will have waves 4 through 6, and where they would employ the smallest employers with 19 or fewer employees. Their hope is that by the time that the program is fully up and operational, that they will have over 500,000 participants and about $5 billion of assets under management. In terms of a little bit more data about the current status of Oregon, as I mentioned, they have 121 employees that are enrolled out of a possible population of 158. So 37 employees have opted not to participate. Some of the reasons that were given for why opting out, the most popular were that they already have their own retirement plan. So 12 of the 37 said that they already have their own retirement plan. The next most popular is they couldn't afford to save at this time, and that's 11 employees said that. And then the other was sort of a miscellaneous other category where 7 respondents said they wanted to opt out for other reasons. Currently, the total contributions of the 121 employees is over $14,000, and the average contribution rate is 4.59%. The next programmable feature is the California Secure Choice Program. It was enacted September 29, 2016. That said, the legislation establishing the Secure Choice Board and authorizing the feasibility study was actually enacted back in September 2012. So California was actually one of the first states to enact legislation to authorize and begin the study, a feasibility study back in 2012. Again, it is an IRA slash defined contribution style account. The investments will be in managed accounts, investing in U.S. Treasuries, MIRAs, or other similar investments. Although with the current administration's decision very recently to wind down the MIRA programs, I think largely, at least the beginning for California Secure Choice, it will primarily be in U.S. Treasuries. The money in the program may be invested by the treasurer or in whole or in part under contract with the Board of California, on behalf of the California Secure Choice Board, with private money managers. There is a cap on fees. So California has said that total program fees cannot be more than 1% of the total program fund. In terms of governance, there are 9 individuals and staff to the Secure Choice program. The 9 members are as follows: the treasurer serving as the chair, the California Director of Finance, the California Comptroller, an individual with retirement savings and investment experience appointed by the Senate, an employee representative appointed by Speaker of the Assembly, a small business representative appointed by the governor, a public member appointed by the governor, and 2 additional members appointed by the governor. The default contribution rate is 3%, with the board's discretion to adjust the ranges between 2 and 5%. The board may implement auto-escalation, and if so, the auto-escalation cannot increase more than 1% a year and is capped at 8% of salary. The employee may opt out of auto-escalation and may set his or her own contribution rate. There are incentives and penalties in the California Secure Choice program. The incentives include tax credits available to small businesses for allowing their employees to participate in the program, and the use of federal retirement savings contributions credits, the SAVERS credit, available to low and moderate income households. In terms of penalties, when the Secure Choice program is up and running, each eligible employer that fails to allow its employees to participate in the program will be penalized $250 per eligible employee that is not covered. And if they, and that should be done on or before 90 days after service and notice by the California Secure Choice Program. And if they were found further to be in non-compliance after 180 days, additional penalties of $500 per eligible employees may be assessed. The coverage of the program are all employers with 5 or more employees, and they do not currently provide retirement plan to their employees. The status in terms of California Secure Choice is that it is in development. The California Secure Choice Retirement Program became effective January 1, 2017 of this, January 1 of this year. It is anticipated that they will begin enrollment. The program will be stood up and begin enrollment sometime in 2018. Within 12 months after the board opens the program for enrollment, the eligible employees with more than 100 employees will be the first to be enrolled. Then within 24 months, employers with 50 employees or more will be the next cohort. And then within 36 months, all other employers with at least 5 employees will begin implementation enrollment in California Secure Choice. So the reason we highlighted Oregon was because it was the first state to begin implementation. We highlighted California because they were the first state to actually begin this process, and just by its sheer size, when fully operational, it will be the biggest program. And then the last program we want to highlight is the most recent one, which is the Vermont Green Mountain Secure Choice Retirement. It was enacted June of 2017. And the other unique feature of the Vermont program is that unlike California and Oregon and a few other states, this is a multiple employer 401k plan. That is, it is not an auto IRA program where only contributions of the employees can go into retirement savings accounts. That because it is an ERISA multiple employer plan, it can take contributions from employers as well. In terms of governance, it was the enacting legislation calls for a board of 7 individuals. It is anticipated that, or actually the legislation calls for the treasurer to serve as chair, that the governor shall appoint individuals, an individual with investment experience, and an individual with private sector retirement plan experience, that the treasurer shall appoint an individual with investment experience and an individual who is an employee or retiree, and the Speaker of the House shall appoint an individual who is an employee advocate or consumer advocate, and the committee of the Vermont legislature shall appoint an individual who is an employer with 50 employees or less. The program is capped, or the coverage is voluntary, but would apply to small businesses with 50 employees or less, and that currently does not offer a retirement plan to its employees. And obviously, it's in the developmental phase, but it is anticipate it, or their goal is to be beginning enrollment on or before January 15, 2019, and that on or before January 15, 2020, and every year thereafter, the board shall make report to the Vermont State Legislature on the operation of the Green Mountain Secure Retirement Plan. And then in addition to these three that we've highlighted, there are other states that are in the midst of implementation. So Washington and New Jersey have a marketplace style of plan where it's somewhat similar to the ACA marketplace, where plan service providers can be vetted by the state, and if they meet their criteria, will be part of the marketplace. Illinois, Connecticut, Maryland have a program that is very similar to Oregon and California, and they are, again, in the midst of development. And then Massachusetts, which actually was the first state to enact a program for its nonprofit sector in the state, they are still in the stages of implementation as well, or in the developmental stage. So what's next? So our belief is that states, more states are going to be, going through the legislative process. With Oregon coming online, with California coming online in the next year or so. We think that that many other states will be encouraged by this, and so we fully anticipate that there will be at least another 20, in 2018, number of states will go take legislative action, and we'll see how far they get through the legislative process in 2018. Will the federal government take any action? Given the level of uncertainty and unpredictability there currently is in Washington, D.C., it's a fair guess, and it's anybody's call as to whether there is the political will and attention to craft something. Certainly, in some respect, we took a little bit of a step back when Congress undid the Department of Labor regulation that provided additional level of comfort to states to move down this area through the Congressional Review Act back in May and June of this year. But hopefully the federal government will take more positive action to foster state innovation, as well as think about retirement security on a more thoughtful federal level. And then who knows, given where states are, maybe the service providers in the private sector, the Fidelities, the Vanguards of the world, and others, hopefully they will take notice and see that there is a market here, that this market could be very successful, and they may innovate themselves to provide products and services that small businesses can afford and that are attractive. So in terms of additional resources, there are most of the states that have a state program have websites. The furthest along is Oregon, and I encourage you to take a look if folks in your state are thinking about implementing something along these lines. as well as a number of organizations that are very helpful with great research, great materials and resources. So before I close for questions, I do want to make a thanks and acknowledgement to a number of folks who are very instrumental in the production of this second edition. It begins with Deborah Cope and Comcore Consulting, who did the bulk of the writing for the Secure Choice 2.0. On our staff, I'd like to thank Amanda Rocca and Michael Kahn and NCPERS staff, as well as the board. Certainly the folks who gave their time with our interviews. And then Siegel and Kayla Gates and other collaborators who've been with us for the last 6 years, not only with the original work, but certainly contributing to the Secure Choice 2.0. So at this time, I'd like to see if there's any questions from the audience. There doesn't seem to be any. I guess my final words are, again, if NCPERS could be helpful in any efforts to bring retirement security to the private sector, please let us know. And if you hear anything in terms of legislative interest by your policymakers in your state or local jurisdiction, we'd be very interested in knowing that as well. That type of information certainly helps us to understand where we think the trend is going, and we'd like to be helpful if the state needs additional information or research. And then finally, I just want to highlight some of the additional educational programs that we have coming up for the balance of 2017. So thank you so much for joining me today. I believe there will be a short question, a survey question about this webinar. We encourage you to take that brief survey. It helps us to refine the education that we provide through the Center for Online Learning. Thank you again, and look forward to talking to you at our next webinar.